Mimi Dietrich.
All right, good evening. Good evening. My name is Mimi Dietrich, and I am the 2015 honoree for the Quilters Hall of Fame. But better than that, I live in Baltimore, and I wore my special, this is really a Maryland flag scarf, but it's the colors of Lord Baltimore. And I wore it because Elly Sienkiewicz is being inducted into the Quilters Hall of Fame. And for me personally, I am thrilled that she's being inducted. I met Elly, I think I can say I met her 40 years ago. It's sort of 40 years ago. And the thing that I remember most about Elly is that I was inspired. She inspired me. Okay. She inspired me to teach Baltimore album quilt classes. And the first time that I taught a class, I was at my local quilt shop, and I was talking to them about, could we possibly have a class that maybe goes a year long, because Elly's first book was divided into 12 chapters. And they're great, let's do it. So we set up a class on a Sunday afternoon and a Monday morning. And those classes filled like that. And then they said, well, how about if we add another class? So we had a second Sunday afternoon class, and we added a Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and Monday night class. So I had suddenly 5 classes with 15 people in each class, and that adds up to 75 people. And I thought, what have I gotten into? Well, what I got into was probably my favorite thing that I've ever done, and it's teaching Baltimore album quilt classes. And I used Elly's book for all the time until Baltimore Beauties and Beyond went out of print. But my favorite memory is that after that first group where there were 75 people, can you imagine 75 people? And we had done some fun things. We had tote bags made. We had, I don't know, we just had pins made. We did all these kinds of things. And at the very end, we had a show and tell. It was probably maybe 6 months after that first class. And somebody said, we should invite Elly. And we all went, yeah, we should invite Elly. So we invited Elly. And the coolest thing was that she came, and she was up there on stage helping people hold up their quilts. She was, making over them, talking about how wonderful they were. And she just made everyone feel so welcome into, I'm going to call it the sisterhood of stitches, maybe, of Baltimore stitches. And she inspired all of those people to wait a minute, not all of them, but most of them, to finish their quilts. Because as we did show and tell, some people had finished, some people had a few blocks, and some people had pinned their blocks onto a big sheet so that it looked like the quilt was done. So it gave the impression that we had, 75 people were making Baltimore album quilts. So it was just a great moment. And Elly is such a special person to me. And I know she's a special person to some other people in the room tonight. And I know that there's a couple people who would like to just pay a little tribute to Elly. So I am not going to introduce people. I'm just going to say, would someone like to come up and say anything? But I know the first person that I'm going to call on is Rhonda McAllen. So here comes Rhonda.
Thank you. And I do want to, all right, here. Okay. And I do want to say that there's many of us who are very jealous of that grad class and wish we all lived closer to come to it. But I'd like to thank everyone for being here to induct Elly into the Hall of Fame. It means so much to her, and it means so much to me because I nominated Elly. And it's been a long time coming, but it's here and I'm thrilled to be here. Elly was a very special person, as I had explained, yesterday, and you've seen my face way too much through this whole thing. But, we had such fun times, and there's one story that I was going to relate, and that is when the Academy moved to Lewis, Delaware. Two friends that I had met, Nancy Kearns and Darla Hanks, we had gone into Lewis about a day ahead of time. And so we decided to go antique shopping. And we went to some little town in Delaware, and we walked in, and the entire place was filled with women's hats from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And they were in like pristine condition. We couldn't believe it. And of course, Darla and I are thinking, oh my God, look at all that silk ribbon, all those flowers. We're going to rip those things off of those hats and stick them on our quilts. And we did. And so we bought all these hats, and then we decided, we've got all these hats. I mean, I had to buy a suitcase to take mine back. It was just ridiculous. I come home and my husband's like, oh my God, where have you been? But anyway, so we decided to start wearing these hats. And the first day I walked in, and I had a mink hat on and a stone martin. And I don't know if any of you know what a stone martin is. And people just about fell out of their chairs. But each day we wore a different hat, and it grew in the Academy. And each year there'd be a few more people who would bring their hats, and it became a thing that one evening there would be, or afternoon, there would be a tea, and we all walked in our grandmother's hats. And it was such a wonderful memory, and we had such a good time doing it, that I hate for that tradition to have gone away, but it did. But it wouldn't have happened without Elly's Academy. And it was such a sisterhood, and you're so right. But thank you everyone for coming and honoring Elly with this tribute.
Thanks, Rhonda. All right, would anybody else come up and tell a story? This is just so perfect. Wait, do you see who's coming? Okay. She's got a hat on.
The hats eventually turned into hats, fans, gloves, reticules, maybe a little flouncy skirts, at any rate. So I put the mic closer to your mouth, please. Better? Yes. Ah, okay. My name is Susan Day. I live in Providence, Rhode Island, at the moment. I've known Elly since first class I took from her was in '94. I was several years into my own quilting journey, teaching myself patchwork from Georgia Bonesteel books, which was a good choice. This is pre-rotary cutter. And one day I got my college alumni magazine, and on the cover of it, instead of famous secretaries of state and beautiful buildings, there was a quilt. I can't remember whether it was a Philadelphia pavement or a trip around the world, but at any rate, that was the article they wrote about fellow alumna, Elly Sienkiewicz, and her business, the Cabin Fever Calicos. So I thought, this is somebody to get to know. And then I started seeing ads for workshops in Quilters Newsletter magazine. And what's now the National Quilt Museum in Paducah was not for the national meeting, but they used to hold like 3-day workshops. Maybe they still do. And Elly's was one of them. So my first conference with her was in '94. It was during the Lillehammer Olympics. I remember because the museum folks brought in a TV for us to watch. That was the year of Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, and neither one of them won. It was Oksana Bayul, but it was all a drama. So the dimensional applique book had just come out. Elly was supposed to be working on the galleys for Paper Cuts and Plenty, but instead she went out to dinner with us. And in the evening, she would take our books up to her room and sign them for us, and bring them back to us. Well, I ended up going to every one of the Elly Sienkiewicz Applique Academies, where I met Rhonda and made lifelong friends. You know, Dr. Dunton, that we regard as the first person to write about Baltimore album quilts, was a psychiatrist, and an occupational therapy founder who talked about how needlework and weaving and other things were good for nervous ladies. So our gang used to call ourselves the Nervous Ladies of Baltimore. But Elly has always been very dear to me. And Baltimore album quilts have as well. So much so that when I retired from my first career about 6 years ago, I turned around and went back to school. And if I'm successful in defending my thesis next Friday, I'll have a master's degree in textile conservation and historic textiles. And part of my thesis, a lot of it is introductory, because not everybody in academia knows anything about, or everything there is to know about Baltimore quilt. And I have a section in my introductions called The Enduring Lure of Baltimore album quilts. I was determined to use that phrase somewhere, the enduring lure. Like the emerging urge, enduring lure. And there's quite a bit about Elly in it. And there's a couple of pages about you. Oh gosh. We can talk if you have a problem with that. But I thought that tonight would be a good time to read the dedication of my thesis. Eleanor Patton Hamilton Sienkiewicz, this is all your fault. Historian, author.
Covering the picture. Camera.
Oh, but the picture is me, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Historian, author, idol, friend, sister alumna, mentor. You were the last in a long line of frustrated instructors who tried to teach me hand applique. Then in 1994, I finally got it. And my stitches have been exquisite, her word, ever since. Little did I know then that I would fall down the rabbit hole of all things Baltimore, while buried under cotton yardage, with needles, thread, and thimble in hand, and very sharp scissors hanging around my neck. I'm forever grateful.
That was beautiful. That was just beautiful. And what I really hope, I'm standing up here to the side watching everyone in the room tonight, and I am hoping that you are feeling all the good thoughts that we're feeling about Elly. So I have somebody who I want to go next because watch the wires. Because Elly spoke a beautiful language.
My name is Terry Young, and I had the honor and privilege of working very closely with Elly for a number of years. I met her in response to an email blast that she sent to a number of local guilds, and I got this email about a year and a half before I was retiring from my teaching job and thought, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but this sounds interesting. I honestly never heard of her. I was not an applicator, but I loved history and I loved books. And I read that she was an author and I thought this could be a really cool experience. I could learn a lot. So I answered the email blast and she answered and said, when can you come? How about next Thursday? And the rest is history. I would go down, I lived about 45 minutes away, and she lived in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to tell you that it's not a fun drive from anywhere not in Washington, D.C. to Washington, D.C. But it didn't take me long to realize that she was worth the drive. It's hard to explain Elly if you've never met her. She was just an amazing person. I learned so much just watching her passion for everything that she did. But all the while that we're working side by side, we're talking and we're sharing stories about our children, stories about our grandchildren. Ultimately, I ended up staying and we'd have pizza dinners together every time that I went down to work. So I got to know Stan as well. I think I was able to meet all of her children, not her grandchildren, unfortunately, but it was just such a privilege. And I learned, first, one thing I really learned working with her is I love words and I love language. But nobody has a command for the art of language that Elly has. She is a Victorian lady born about a couple of hundred years later. And it was just fascinating to hear her talk and to read her words. But this was her soul. She had that Victorian soul. So it was no surprise when she would tell the stories about going to see these quilts and looking at them and having them speak to her. These were her sisters that lived 100 years ago that had stitched these blocks, and they were telling their stories to her. And she told me that story many times. And every time it was like I was hearing it for the very first time. And I believe that she really had something there. After I retired from teaching, she asked me to go to the academy as a hostess. And for many of those years, I helped in her classrooms. I saw how caring she was. I mean, over the years, every name that I worked with her, every time we'd come across a name, she'd say, oh, Kelly, she made this wonderful boat block. And she'd tell me details about Kelly's life. Oh, it didn't matter who it was. She remembered something about that person, just something personal and something about their stitching, because it was all together. There was no separation. She was so welcoming. People had come up and told me stories about how it was the first time they were at the academy and they had nobody to eat lunch with. And she was walking, just wandering around and they saw somebody sitting on a bench under a tree asking her, would she like to join her for lunch? And then she realized it was Elly. Elly would invite anybody to come and have a meal with her. Nobody was going to feel left out. Nobody was going to feel like they couldn't do this kind of work. Everybody could learn how to do these stitches. She was patient, she was encouraging, and she was passionate. And she inspired so many people that I've talked to over the years. And she inspired me beyond anything I ever could have imagined. She turned And I am not going to do that kind of slow stitching because I have 5 teenagers at home, into somebody who will only touch her machine if she has to sew her blocks together. Elly, I am so thrilled that you're being honored here tonight. I love you. I miss our pizza dinners and our coffee afternoons, and you deserve this. And I hope you continue to inspire people who have never tried to applicate to see that they can do that too. Because the quilts we're making today, somebody's going to look at in 150 years, and they'll be speaking to those women, just like the Baltimore lady spoke to her that day. Thank you.
There's some of us who have been talking about we didn't want to cry, but Terry, you came close. All right. Would anybody else like to say something? This is fun. This is just fun. Okay.
Good evening, I'm Kay Worley, and I'm living proof that sometimes what you don't know is a good thing, because my first 2 applique teachers, Mimi Dietrich and Elly. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Elly for encouraging people like me that had started on the road to applique with Mimi to think, oh, you can pick up a pastel stick, you can pick up a bead, you can paint, you can write your name, you can do anything you want and it's okay. And like I had learned from Mimi, it was my quilt and I could do whatever I wanted to. And when I took a class with Elly, I'm sure she was personally horrified at some of the things she saw us doing in that class, but she never showed it. She was encouraging, she was supportive, she was gracious. She made us feel like we had done a masterpiece. And so I would just like to thank her tonight. She made a huge difference in my life. And I think everybody that came into contact with her, especially those of us who went to class with her, laughed with her, and she just made you think, and she made you think you could do it. And if it didn't quite turn out, you tried again. It wasn't the end of the world. And for that, I'm very grateful to everything she did. Thank you, Elly.
And now I'd like to introduce Kelly Kaut, who's going to also talk to Elly.
Well, hello, Elly. You are missing one heck of a good time here. My first time at one of the celebrations, and I'm totally thrilled that it's in your honor. And I just wanted to say a few words about our project from Lewis, Delaware, starting in 2007, when you had to be in your bonnet about all the quilts that you wanted to have shown in Houston in 2010. And you had a very willing bunch of workers there. And before the first morning was out, I don't know if you'll remember, but you sent us all out to sign up to help. And the list was blank when I went out there, and at the top it said team leader, and then all numbers down the rest of the page. And I went back in and I said, Elly, what does the team leader have to do? And she said, oh, you told me with a straight face, all you have to do is organize it. And I said, well, define organize. And you said you have to cut up the fabric and send it to everybody who signs up to do a block. And I said, I can do that. After 21 years in the Navy, retiring as a commander, I'm a good organizer. I can do that. So I marched back out, put my name down. Eventually, my friend Teresa Jones also put her name down there. And then everybody, including Pat Christ, came out and started signing up, and we had the whole list filled up in no time at all. A bunch of us went to dinner that night. Elly says, well, let me tell you some more about the quilt. And so I'm there writing pages and pages of notes. And we were going back out to our cars, and I said, okay, I got everything written down. When are you going to send me the list of the blocks that you want in the quilt? She said, oh, that's your job. Can you imagine trying to pick out blocks from all of those beautiful patterns that she had in all of her wonderful books? So we did the best we could. We picked out a lot of good ones. You saw our Delaware quilt called Affection's Tribute. It was hanging over at the library. And she chose that one to have Gail Ropp hand quilt. I believe this is the only one in that collection that was hand quilted. And I think it was just the right thing. Nancy Kearns did a beautiful job on the medallion in the center. And we got it done on time. And that's how I got the white hair, Elly. Do you remember I had dark hair when we started? I was so nervous about the whole thing, but Elly, you only offered encouragement every single time I would call you, and all the ladies really pitched in. So for all your love and encouragement, all of us in your Delaware group say thank you. I'll say that as a blanket statement. And as we describe good jobs in the Navy, we say, well done, outstanding. And Elly, thank you ever so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Kelly. I think this is really special because I think you're getting a real insight into how Elly worked and how she would bring people together. Okay. We have a duo.
Things together. Right. So, hi, I'm Sue Nichols, and I'm Pat Holly. We're sisters. We're sisters. So, we first want to say that such an honor for Elly to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. She's, so deserving, and we love Elly, and we've loved Elly for years. And so I'll just tell you a little story about Elly. So I teach machine techniques to all these hand applicators here. So I've been teaching machine quilting and machine applique since the early 90s. And mainly, I think machine quilting was what I was doing a lot of originally, and I still do that. But Pat and I both love applique. We started out as hand appliqueurs, so we can pass that test. I know how to. We know how to do that. But we also love our machine. And I have to say that Elly invited me to teach machine applique at the Applique Academy. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. We get to teach machine applique. And my classes had students in them. It was like, yay. So I always used to think that it was the friends of the hand applicators that came to, like, well, I don't really hand applique. What could I do? And so they take the machine class, and they ended up liking it. And I think maybe before me, I think Lois Smith might have taught some machine applique, but I think I was one of the first machine applique teachers, and that was probably in the early 2000s that I started teaching. And I have to say, it was kind of like I feel right here when I walked into the first class, and we're setting up our sewing machines. It's like, okay, is lightning going to strike us now at the Hand Applique Academy? But again, it's just like you've all said, Elly, so welcoming to all of us. And she could not have been kinder to me, and love the quilts that Pat and I make using machine to do traditional applique, which is what we love, and the history. We love that. And I also did wear a little hat one year, so I've got the hat on.
Well, I'm not quite as familiar with Elly. I didn't have that many encounters with her. Many of my dear friends who are hand applicators just love everything they learned from her. But I was fortunate to be invited to be a guest artist at the Applique Academy one year. So I enjoyed sitting there with my little machine and demoing and showing people what I can do. And I remember Elly coming around and being so kind and grateful and appreciative. And this is like the best thing that could happen to her, to be inducted in this wonderful Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so congratulations, Elly. We love you.
Aren't they cute? They're just so cute. They're just so cute. We would all take classes from them. I take a machine class. Is there anybody else who would like to come up and say anything? Yes, you should. Yes, you should. Okay, so we have Pat and Arlen Christ. Again, the tag team here, and I did talk about the Sisterhood of Stitchers, but Arlen will let you in for tonight, okay?
Well, she needs to know you're here too. I didn't get started yet. Okay, hi Elly, and congratulations. I remember when I started taking classes from you at Applique by the Bay, which is in Lewis, Delaware. She said to me, "You're so quiet all the time." Well, I outgrew that. But I loved her classes so much. And I don't know that I can say any more than what's already said, but I just remember there were 2 words she used repeatedly in her class. That's lovely. That's exquisite. And she said it to everybody. She just encouraged everyone. I think one of the special moments in Delaware was the classes were beginning to dwindle. So they always had a dinner on the last night, and we would go out to a restaurant. And that particular weekend, she invited us to her house in Lewis, and we had the best time. And for that, we're really grateful. I think Arlen has a little something to say, don't you, dear?
Oh, absolutely. The thing that I often think about was we were invited to give a lecture at the Williamsburg Academy. And it turned out to be probably one of the most wonderful lectures. And we did a special one. It was on applique, of course, but a little bit of the history of applique, American applique. And we thoroughly enjoyed being there, and we thank you for that invite. And again, we did a special presentation here for you, Elly, and we really miss you. Wish you well.
I will say the exhibit that we did here for you, we called a tribute to Elly. The thing that was really special about the Applique Academy, it was during tax season. So you know you're loved when he takes off a number of days to do a presentation. Congratulations, and we love you.
Do we have anybody else who would like to speak? All right. I personally just hope that everybody in the room and everybody on Zoom has had the opportunity to just experience how we feel about Elly. And Elly, we hope you've enjoyed this. And I would personally like to thank everybody here at the Quilters Hall of Fame for choosing Elly to be honored this year. I think you got it right. This is a great time. Thank you. Love you, Elly.